Everybody's asking me, who's that bunch of personality? I'm presenting you right now. Baby, take a bow. Everybody wants to know where I found the lovely cameo. I'm presenting you right now. Baby, take a bow. Hear them whispering, hasn't she got everything? You're a standout. Listen to the compliments they hand out. Let me stand right up and say, meet the future Mrs. Hemingway. I'm presenting you right now. Baby, take a bow.
Greetings, fine individuals, and welcome once again to the Dr. Zeero Free Magic Secrets Show, where today we're going to talk a little bit about Aleister Crowley, and specifically something he wrote regarding black magic and the left-hand path. And hopefully this will dispel any notions that people may or may not have. And this will be expressed verbatim as it is written on the page. And it's from his book, Magick, in Theory and Practice. This book, along with 777, his book on the Kabbalah, are most likely his two most important books. One thing I wanted to add about this book is that learn what you can from him and move on. And always understand that as much as he gets right, he gets things wrong. And the thing that I feel is the most wrong is that, well, it was absolutely noble to peel back the Kabbalah from its Jewish mythology and make a more accessible version of it that is open to everyone. And he did a lot of good things, but Israel Regardie was his personal secretary and wrote most of the material. He composed most of it. Crowley was a great editor. But as you look at the book Magick in Theory and Practice, the way it's put together with the bulletin pointed paragraphs and using the word liber here, liber there, all the Latin stuff, and just the entire way it's presented. One thing that gets glossed over is that, Aleister Crowley was in Italy during the fascist period before World War II happened, during the days when Mussolini was actually seen as in a positive light by the world. Because before he invaded Ethiopia in 1935, he was Time Magazine Man of the Year. Gandhi paid him tribute. There were no wars that he was involved in, and people kind of basically kissed his ass, and he was left alone. He was like that Lex Luthor figure at the center of Italy, and he took this supposedly backwards country and made it run on time. And for the 1920s, he had a lot of positive press. But it's like when you see a movie, and you have to see the entire movie before you make a judgment. You can't just watch the movie halfway through and give it 5-star review. And that's what was happening with the world. There was no, the crazy Austrian guy. He didn't exist yet. So they didn't really understand where it was leading. But my point is that when you read the actual writings of Benito there, and the way his entire style with the paragraphs and everything is so similar to what Aleister Crowley is done in his book Magick in Theory and Practice. It's the same sort of setup. And this is something that is, I think, very directly influenced, because that's how a smarty pants would write in the 1920s and such, and 1930s and before that. Because, Mussolini came to power in 1922, but there's a crossover. So anyway, I'm just putting that out there. And just like Mussolini, Aleister Crowley was he's a canned ham, an extremely brilliant spam, imitation ham. The package makes it look like it's going to be straight up cooked out of an oven, but it's spam, right? So an intelligent imitation. So where Mussolini was a actor who did a great imitation of his whole thing, got trapped in his role, and many of us know, well, you should know how that ended for him. You should look into history. But Aleister Crowley, he ended up in a burned out end, the same. But nobody came and hung his corpse on hooks or anything. They just didn't care. He was just a disreputable old man and died in a bed alone. He was ended up, he was a decadent bohemian who was a big shock rock sort of guy of his time. I think he's kind of today he would be like a metal guy with a YouTube channel. He's definitely the shock rock material kind of guy, but of course existing long before rock and roll. So I wanted to dispel any notions that he was directly into black magic. Now, you could say that what he created with Thelema, technically in the eyes of Christians or someone else, would be black magic, because it would be therefore an abomination and some freaky thing. When you study magic, you realize not so much. It's more like taking the Kabbalah and moving it back to its primal sources in an anarchic way. But then he interjected all his own stuff into it, which therefore then made him the boss hog. And then later on, he got overthrown from his own organization that he supposedly was not running. So anyway, the point is, I feel that if you're going to study Kabbalah, either you got to learn the Hermetic and the way the alchemy does, learn Egyptian version of the Grand Pentagram and how that relates, and you learn the Jewish version. Thelema is like the diluted and filled with too much ridiculous spam, globbed off the big canned ham. So you got to clear out what's gibberish and what's not, and that's the problem. So anyway, back to the point. Chapter 21 of Black Magic, of the main types of the operation of magic art, and the powers of the Sphinx. Here's verbatim. As was said at the opening of the second chapter, the single supreme ritual is the attainment of the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. It is the raising of the complete man in a vertical straight line. Any deviation from this line tends to become black magic. Any other operation is black magic. In the true operation, the exaltation is equilibrated by an expansion of the other three arms of the cross. Hence, the angel immediately gives the adept power over the four great princes and their servitors. If the magician needs to perform any other operation than this, it is only lawful insofar as it is a necessary preliminary to that one work, all in capitals. There are, however, many shades of gray. It is not every magician who is well armed with theory. Perhaps one such may invoke Jupiter with the wish to heal others of their physical ills. This sort of thing is harmless, or almost so. It is not evil in itself. It arises from a defect of understanding. Until the great work has been performed, it is presumptuous for the magician to pretend to understand the universe and dictate its policy. Only the master of the temple can say whether any given set is a crime. "Slay that innocent child," I hear the ignorant say. "What a horror!" "Ah," replies the knower with foresight of history, "but the child will become Nero. Hasten to strangle him." There is a third above these who understand that Nero was as necessary as Julius Caesar. The master of the temple accordingly interferes not with the scheme of things, except just so far as he is doing the work which he is sent to do. Why should he struggle against imprisonment, banishment, death? It is all part of the game in which he is a pawn. It was necessary for the Son of Man to suffer these things and to enter into his glory, quote unquote. The master of the temple is so far from the man in whom he manifests that all these matters are of no importance to him. It may be of importance to his work that man shall sit upon a throne or be hanged, In such a case, he informs his magus, who exerts the power entrusted to him, and it happens accordingly. Yet all happens naturally and of necessity, and to all appearance without a word from him. Nor will the mere master of the temple, as a rule, presume the act upon the universe, save as the servant of his own destiny. It is only the magus, he of the great above, who has attained to Hokmah, wisdom, and so dare act. He must dare act, although it like him not. Be he must assume the curse of his grade, as it is written in the book of the magus. There are, of course, entirely black forms of magic. To him who has not given every drop of his blood for the cup of Babylon, all magic power is dangerous. There are even more debased and evil forms, things in themselves black. Such is the use of spiritual force to material ends. Christian scientists, mental healers, professional diviners, psychics, and the like are all ipso facto black magicians. They exchange gold for dross. They sell their higher powers for gross and temporary benefit. That the most crass ignorance of magic is their principal characteristic is no excuse, even if nature accepted excuses, which she does not. If you drink poison and mistake for wine, your mistake will not save your life. Below these in one sense, yet far above them in another, are the brotherhood or the brothers of the left-hand path. These are they who, quote-unquote, shut themselves up, who refuse their blood to the cup, who have trampled love in the race for self-aggrandizement. As far as the grade of exempt adept, they are on the same path as the White Brotherhood, for until that grade is attained, the goal is not disclosed. Then only are the goats, the lonely leaping mountain masters, separated from the gregarious, huddling valley-bound sheep. Then those who have well learned the lessons of the path are ready to be torn asunder, to give up their life to the babe of the abyss, which is and is not they. The others, proud in their purple, refuse. They make themselves a false crown of the horror of the abyss. They set the dispersion of coronazone upon their brows. They clothe themselves in the poisoned robes of form. They shut themselves up, and when the force that made them what they are is exhausted, their strong towers fall. They become the eaters of dung in the day of Be With Us, and their shreds strewn in the abyss are lost. Not so the masters of the temple that sit as piles of dust in the city of the pyramids, awaiting the great flame that shall consume that dust to ashes. For the blood that they have surrendered is treasured in the cup of Our Lady Babylon, a mighty medicine to wake the eld of the All-Father and redeem the Virgin of the world from her virginity. Before leaving the subject of black magic, one may touch lightly upon the question of pacts with the devil. The devil does not exist. It is a false name invented by the Black Brothers to imply a unity in their ignorant muddle of dispersions. A devil who had unity would be a god. It was said by the sorcerer of the Jura that in order to invoke the devil, it is only necessary to call him with your whole will. This is an universal magical truth and applies to every other being as much as to the devil. For the whole will of every man is in reality the whole will of the universe. It is, however, always easy to call up the demons, for they are always calling you, and you have only to step down to their level and fraternize with them. They will then tear you into pieces at their leisure. Not at once. They will wait until you have wholly broken the link between you and your holy guardian angel before they pounce, lest at the last moment you escape. Anatomy of Padua, which, and in our times McGregor Mathers, are examples of such victims. Nevertheless, every magician must firmly extend his empire to the depth of hell. My adepts stand upright, their heads above the heavens, their feet below their hells. This is the reason why the magician who performs the operation of sacred magic of Abramelin the Mage, immediately after attaining to the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, must evoke the four great princes of the evil of the world. Obedience and faith to him that liveth and triumpheth, that reigneth above you in your palaces as the balance of righteousness and truth, is your duty to your Holy Guardian Angel and the duty of the demon world to you. These powers of evil nature are wild beasts. They must be tamed, trained to the saddle and the bridle. They will bear you well. There is nothing useless in the universe. Do not wrap up your talent in a napkin because it is only quote-unquote dirty money. With regards to pacts, they are rarely lawful. There should be no bargain struck. Magic is not a trade, and no hucksters need apply. Master everything, but give generously to your servants, once they have unconditionally submitted. There is also the question of alliances with various powers. These, again, are hardly ever allowable. No power, which is not a microcosm in itself, and even archangels reach rarely to this center of balance, is fit to treat on an equality with man. The proper study of mankind is God, with him in his business, and with him alone. Some magicians have hired legions of spirits for some special purpose, but it has always proved a serious mistake. The whole idea of exchange is foreign to magic. The dignity of the magician forbids compacts. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. The operations of magic art are difficult to classify as they merge into each other, owing to the essential unity of their method and result. We may mention one. Operations such as evocation, in which a live spirit is brought from dead matter. 2. Consecrations of talismans, in which a live spirit is bound into quote-unquote dead matter and vivifies the same. 3. Works of divination, in which a live spirit is made to control operations of the hand or brain of the magician. Such works are accordingly the most dangerous, to be used only by advanced magicians, and then with great care. Number 4. Works of fascination, such as operations of invisibility and transformations of the apparent form of the person or thing concerned. This consists almost altogether in distracting the attention or disturbing the judgment of the person whom it is wished to deceive. There are, however, real transformations of the adept himself which are very useful. See the Book of the Dead for methods. The assumption of God forms can be carried to the point of actual transformation. Number 5, works of love and hate, which are also performed as a rule by a fascination. These works are too easy and rarely useful. They have a nasty trick of recoiling on the magician. Number 6, works of destruction, which may be done in many different ways. One may fascinate and bend to one's will a person who has of his own right the power to destroy. One may employ spirits or talismans. The more powerful magicians of the last few centuries have employed books. In private matters, these works are very easy, if they be necessary. An adept known to the Master Therion once found it necessary to slay a Circe who was bewitching brethren. He merely walked to the door of her room and drew an astral T, Treditor, and the symbol of Saturn with an astral dagger. Within 48 hours, she shot herself. See, he's a baller. Yeah. Number 7, works of creation and dissolution and the higher Eden vocations. There are also hundreds of other operations to bring wanted objects, gold, books, women, and the like, to open locked doors, to discover treasure, to swim underwater, to have armed men at command, etc., etc. All these are really matters of detail. The Adeptus Major will easily understand how to perform them if necessary. It should be added that all these things happen quote-unquote naturally. Perform an operation to bring gold. Your rich uncle dies and leaves you his money. Books. You see the book wanted in a catalog that very day, although you have advertised in vain for a year. Woman. But if you have made the spirits bring you enough gold, this operation will become unnecessary, says Aleister Crowley. It must further be remarked that it is absolute black magic to use any of these powers if the object can possibly be otherwise attained. If your child is drowning, you must jump and try to save him. It won't do to invoke the Undinis, nor is it lawful in a circumstance to invoke those Undinis even when the case is hopeless. Maybe it is necessary to you and to the child that it should die. An exempt adept on the right road will make no errors here. An adept major is only too likely to do so. Thorough apprehension of this book will arm adepts of every grade against all the more serious blunders incidental to their unfortunate positions. Necromancy is of sufficient importance to demand a section to itself. It is justifiable in some exceptional cases. Suppose the magician fail to obtain access to living teachers, or should he need some a special piece of knowledge, which he has a reason to believe died with some teacher of the past, it may be useful to evoke the shade of such a tone, or read the Akashic record of his mind. If this is to be done, and it must be done properly, very much on the lines of the evocation of Apollonius of Tyana, which Eliphas Levi performed. The utmost care must be taken to prevent personation of the shade. It is, of course, easy, but can rarely be advisable to evoke the shade of a suicide, or of who one violently slain or suddenly dead. Of what use is such an operation, save to gratify curiosity or vanity? One must add a word on spiritism, which is sort of a indiscriminate necromancy. One might prefer the word necrophilia by amateurs. They make themselves perfectly passive, and, as so far from employing any method of protection, deliberately invite all and sundry spirits, demons, shells of the dead, all the excrement and filth of earth and hell to squirt their slime over them. This invitation is readily accepted unless a clean man be present with an aura good enough to frighten these foul denizens of the pit. No spiritualistic manifestation has ever taken place in the presence even of Frater Perdurabo, how much less in that of the Master Therion. Of all the creatures he ever met, the most prominent of English spiritists, a journal and a pacifist of more than European fame, had the filthiest mind and the foulest mouth. He would break off any conversation to tell a stupid, smutty story, and could hardly convince of any society assembling for any other purpose than phallic orgies, whatever they may be. Utterly incapable of keeping to his subject, he would drag the conversation down again and again to the sole subject of what he really thought. Sex and sex perversions, and sex and sex and sex and sex again. This was the plain result of his spiritism. All spiritists are more or less similarly afflicted. They feel dirty even across the street. Their auras are ragged, muddy, and malodorous. They ooze the slime of putrefying corpses. No spiritist, once he is wholly enmeshed in sentimentality and Freudian fear phantasms, is capable of concentrated thought, of persistent will, or of moral character. Devoid of every spark of the divine light, which was his birthright, a prey before death to the ghastly tenets of the grave. The wretch, like the mesmerized living corpse of Poe's Monsieur of Valdemar, is a nearly liquid mass of loathsome, of detestable putrescence. The student of this holy magic is most earnestly warned against frequenting their seances, or even admitting them to his presence. They are contagious as syphilis, and more deadly and disgusting, unless your aura is strong enough to inhibit any manifestation of the loathly larvae that have taken up their habitation in them. Shun them as you need not mere lepers. Of the powers of the Sphinx, much has been written. Wisely, they have been kept in the forefront of true magical instruction. Even the tyro can always rattle off that he has to know, to dare to will and keep silent. It is difficult to write on the subject, for these powers are indeed comprehensive, and the interplay of one with the other becomes increasingly evident as one goes more deeply into the subject. But there is one general principle which seems worthy of special emphasis in this place. These four powers are thus complex because they are the powers of the Sphinx. That is, they are the functions of a single organism. Now, those who understand the growth of organisms are aware that evolution depends on adaptation to environment. If an animal which cannot swim is occasionally thrown into water, it may escape by some piece of good fortune. But if it is thrown into water continuously, it will drown sooner or later, unless it learns to swim. Organisms, being to a certain extent elastic, they soon adapt themselves to a new environment, provided that the change is not so sudden as to destroy that elasticity. Now, a change in environment involves a repeated meeting of new conditions. And if you want to adapt yourself to any given set of conditions, the best thing you can do is to place yourself cautiously and persistently among them. That is the foundation of all education. The old-fashioned pedagogues were not all so stupid as some modern educators would have us think. The principle of the system was to strike the brain a series of constantly repeated blows until the proper reaction became normal to the organism. It is not desirable to use ideas which excite interest or may come in handy later as weapons in this fundamental training of the mind. It is much better to compel the mind to busy itself with root ideas which do not mean very much to the child, because you are not trying to excite the brain but to drill it. For this reason, all the best minds have been trained by preliminary study of classics and mathematics. The same principle applies to the training of the body. The original exercises should be of a character to train the muscles, generally to perform any kind of work, rather than to train them for some special kind of work, concentration on which will unfit them for other tasks by depriving them of the elasticity, which is the proper condition of life. In magic and meditation, this principle applies with tremendous force. It is quite useless to teach people how to perform magical operations, when it may be that such operations, when they have learned to do them, are not in accordance with their wills. What must be done is to drill the aspirant in the hard routine of the elements of the royal art. So far as mysticism is concerned, the technique is extremely simple and has been very simply described in part 1 of the book 4. It cannot be said too strongly that any amount of mystical success, whatever, is no compensation for slackness with regard to technique. There may come a time when samadhi himself is no part of the business of the mystic, but the character developed by the original training remains an asset. In other words, the person who has made himself a first-class brain capable of elasticity is competent to attack any problem soever. When he who has merely specialized has gotten into a groove and can no longer adapt and adjust himself to new conditions. The principle is quite universal. You do not train a violinist to play the Beethoven concerto. You train him to play every conceivable consecution of notes with perfect ease, and you keep him at the most monotonous drill possible for years and years before you allow him to go onto the platform. You make of him an instrument perfectly able to adjust himself to any musical problem that may be set before him. This technique of yoga is the most important detail of all our work. The Master Therion has been himself somewhat to blame in representing this technique as of value simply because it leads to the great rewards such as samadhi. He would have been wiser to base his teaching solely on the ground of evolution, but probably he thought of the words of the poet, "You dangle a carrot in front of her nose, and she goes wherever the carrot goes." For after all, one cannot explain the necessity of the study of Latin either to imbecile children or to stupid educationalists. For, not having learned Latin, they have not developed the brains to learn anything. The Hindus, understanding these difficulties, have taken the God Almighty attitude about the matter. If you go to a Hindu teacher, he treats you as less than an earthworm. You have to do this, and you have to do that, and you are not allowed to know why you are doing it. After many years of experience in teaching, the Master Therion is not altogether convinced that this is not the right attitude. When people begin to argue about things instead of doing them, they become absolutely impossible. Their minds begin to work about it, and they come out by the same door as in they went. They remain brutish, voluble, and uncomprehending. The technique of magic is just as important as that of mysticism. But here we have a very much more difficult problem because the original unit of magic, the body of light, is already something unfamiliar to the ordinary person. Nevertheless, this body must be developed and trained with exactly the same rigid discipline as the brain in the case of mysticism. The essence of the technique of magic is the development of the body of light, which must be extended to include all members of the organism, and indeed of the cosmos. The most important drill practices are: 1, the fortification of the body of light by the constant use of rituals, by the assumption of God forms, and by the right use of the Eucharist. 2, the purification and consecration and exaltation of that body by the use of rituals of invocation. 3, the education of that body by experience. It must learn to travel on every plane, to break down every obstacle which may confront it. This experience must be systematic and regular as possible, for it is of no use merely to travel to the spheres of Jupiter and Venus, or even to explore the 30 aethers, neglecting unattractive meridians. The object is to possess a body which is capable of doing easily any particular task that may lie before it. There must be no selection or special experience which appeals to one's immediate desire. One must go steadily through all the possible pylons. Frater Perdurabo was a very unfortunate in not having magical teachers to explain these things to him. He was rather encouraged in unsystematic working. Very fortunate, on the other hand, was he to have found a guru who instructed him in the proper principles of the techniques of yoga, and he, having sufficient sense to recognize the universal application of those principles, was able to some extent to repair his original defects. But even to this day, despite the fact that his original inclination is much stronger towards magic than towards mysticism, he is much less competent in magic. A trace of this can be seen even in his method for combining the two divisions of our science, for in that method he makes concentration bearer the cross of the work. This is possibly an error, probably a defect, certainly an impurity of thought, and the root of it is to be found in his original bad discipline with regard to magic. If the reader will turn to the account of his astral journeys in the second number of the first volume of the Equinox, he will find that these experiments were quite capricious. Even in Mexico, he got the idea of exploring the 30 aethers systematically. He abandoned the vision after only 2 aethers had been investigated. Very different is his record after training in 1901. EV had put him in the way of discipline. At the conclusion of this part of this book, one may sum up the whole matter in these words. There is no object whatever worthy of attainment, but the regular development of the being of the aspirant by steady scientific work. He should not attempt to run before he can walk. He should not wish to go somewhere until he knows for certain whither he will go. So that's all for the Dr. Zeero show today, and please hit the subscribe button. Please let people know I exist. I'm just a secret, blah, 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 blah. Have a good evening.